Okay, we're in the book of Matthew, chapter 2, and we're going to begin reading, and then we're going to go to Luke, chapter 2, and coordinate some things that was in the form of a question last Sunday evening. Now, as you know, for the longest time, I've been teaching that the date of December the 25th is not the true date of Christmas. It simply is a secular, pseudo-religious holiday that was formed in the 4th century to accommodate pagans, heathens, Babylonian mysticism, and Christendom, which had become the state religion of Rome through their emperor Constantine. So Christmas really, the way we celebrate it today, is a combination of all of those things. And December the 25th is not the day when Jesus Christ was born. We answer that, in my opinion, very conclusively last Sunday evening. He was born around April the 1st. So again, there are bountiful lies involving the Christmas story. Now, in verse number 1 of Matthew chapter 2, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, we're going to study Herod. And believe it or not, this one man has, in more than perhaps many others in both history and in sacred history, influenced Christmas as we have it in the Bible. He was one of the most powerful men in the world at that time. He was second in genius to Caesar Augustus and Julius Caesar at that time. He was an absolutely brilliant man who was a genius in his own right as far as business was concerned, as far as the military was concerned, as far as politics were concerned. So we're going to learn about him and his family, because with this genius man came the 4-generation curse as we find it in Scripture. And it gives us a resound warning that if we do not celebrate Christmas properly, in spirit and in truth, this same curse can be passed not only down upon us, but to our children. So he's the man that will be the central figure. But there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we are come to worship him." When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now Herod should have known. Not only that, his cronies, his religious cronies, the Sanhedrin, should have known. Now the Sanhedrin did not like Herod. He was an Idumean, that is, he was an Arab from Esau, and he was not of pure Jewish stock. He was a relative, but they hated him because he was not a Jew. His father Esau persecuted Jacob, their father. But be that as it may, the Sanhedrin didn't know that the Messiah was going to be born either. Here you have the religious leaders that are quite caught off guard when the Messiah did come. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes and the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, Thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not least among the princes of Judah. Now you'll recall Jacob blessing his sons, and how the firstborn right went from Reuben to the sons of Joseph, but then he made a switcheroo and said, the scepter shall not depart out of Judah until Shiloh come. Now Shiloh is a reference to the Messiah. And so here again we have Judah being mentioned as the tribe and the area from which Messiah would be born. For out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had privately called the wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star appeared. So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, but I want you to get the background here. Herod was king of the Jews. He had been pronounced king of the Jews 3 different times on 3 different occasions. Now actually, his one son is going to be called the fox, but he got it by way of his father. Herod the Great was indeed a fox. He was shrewd politically. And each time he would come up on the short end of the deal, he would get the raw deal. And because of his genius, he would always make friends with the one newly in charge, and they would turn right around and pronounce him King of the Jews. And time again, that happened. He was with his friend Mark Antony, and he was raised with Antony. He was under Antony's leadership. That's Antony of Cleopatra fame. That's where our history is absolutely essential. History next to the Word of God should be our most important subject because it all fits together. His history is his story, so it's important. Herod grew up with Mark Antony under the Roman system of government, and he became an officer in the Roman cavalry. And so he was a very, very brilliant man, a good soldier, a good fighter. He was the best wrestler in all of Rome, and he was just a tremendous fellow. So here we now have Herod being pronounced King of the Jews, and you have some wise men coming down. Now, here were some fearless fellows. Now, why do I say that? Because they were undoubtedly Persians. But Persians turned into the Parthians that hated Herod. You have to remember that the Parthians wanted what's known as the Levant. The Levant is Palestine and the area surrounding it. And so the Parthians, time and again, would come down against Herod, and because Herod was a good soldier, he would beat them back. Now, no one ever defeated them. Rome tried. I remember one of the triumvirate, Cassius came, and he was one of the first of the what's known as the Roman triumvirate in the early days of Rome. And he came to the Parthians, and he came with several legions, and the Parthians beat him and caught Cassius. This is one of the three of the triumvirate. It was Cassius, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. And so the Parthian king brought this guy before him. Now remember, this is the only area which Rome did not conquer, only people, the Parthians. The Magi were Parthians. And the Parthian king said to Crassus, one of the triumvirate, he said, "Who are you?" And he introduced himself, and he said, "I'm the wealthiest man in the world." And he was. He had hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, Herod was pretty wealthy himself. Some say that he was perhaps second or third in line as to the world's wealth. And he buddied with all of these guys. But anyway, this guy decided he needed a military image. So he got a couple of legions and marched towards the Parthians, and all of Rome would have said, "Man, this guy is fantastic. Not only is he wealthy, but he also has this military image. We'll make him number one rather than a triumvirate, the three rulers of Rome." And so he gets captured. And he says, "I'm the wealthiest man in the world. I have more gold than anybody else." And the Parthian king said, "I am impressed. Since you're the wealthiest man in the world, I'm just simply going to melt down some gold, have my men to open your mouth." They poured it down his gullet. He died, and that's the way one of the first triumvirate ended. Now, the Parthians hated the Romans, and they hated Herod. Now, all of a sudden, we have Parthians coming down and saying, "Where is he born King of the Jews?" King of the Jews? Rome had declared Herod 3 times King of the Jews, one time with their Senate. "You're King of the Jews." So he would go down there and rule. And now, all of a sudden, the most hated of all these people surrounding him, the Parthians, came down and said, "We want to recognize the one born King of the Jews." Now, can you imagine how this would shake one up? And then he gets all of the people in Jerusalem and says, "I want to know where this King of the Jews is going to be born because I want to worship him." What time did the star appear? Then he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, search diligently for the young child." You'll note a change in wording from babe to young child. There was probably a 2-year lapse between the birth of Jesus Christ and the time the Magi arrived. We'll show what happened here in just a little bit. But there was probably a 2-year lapse. I had someone to tell me that on their mantle, they are going to move the the three wise men on the other side of the mantle because they didn't get there till 2 years later. Now, that's pretty good. Listen, that's being honest and accurate. Okay. Search diligently for the young child, and when you have found him, bring him again to me, that I may come and worship him also. That's the death knell for the Herod family. Jesus Christ, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the Messiah of Israel, is going to be born. And the guy in charge says, I want to worship him. Did he really want to worship him? He did not. Tell me something. Does the world today really want to worship Jesus Christ? They do not. And I'm telling you that the curse of the Herodian family is upon this world, and that the children of this world are going to grow up not knowing the truth of Jesus Christ, because the world lies to them. They will be deceived by the lie, Antichrist, and end up worshiping him. And the Christ that was born, that little babe in the manger, is going to come back as the warrior. And the two-edged sword of the word is going to come from his mouth, and the effulgence of his glory is going to burn the flesh of the children who worship the false Christ rather than knowing the truth of Jesus Christ. Now, Herod wanted to worship him. And again, we have a situation in the very first Christmas that we have now. Jesus Christ and his name is thrown out. I mean, Christmas, we're doing something in the name of Christ without acknowledging him as to who he is. Now note, when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. They saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, and when they were come to the house, no longer a manger. I don't believe that the wise men ever saw the manger of Bethlehem. Why? Simply because they exited toward Bethlehem and they saw the star, and the star directed them north to Nazareth, because that's where Jesus was, and it's easy to prove again. So they went and they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down, and they truly worshiped him. Now, here were Gentiles that hated the false king of the Jews, but loved the true king of the Jews. And as you'll see, and when they had opened their treasures, it's an interesting point that the world gives treasures like Adam and Eve, one to the other. But in the first Christmas, the true exchange of gifts was their treasures to Christ and Christ's life to them. They believed in Christ. They truly worshiped him. You see, that's what Christmas is all about. And again, please don't misunderstand. It's good to get gifts. It's good to give gifts. It's good to see the delight in the faces of people when they know that you've thought of them and so forth, and that you love them and you give gifts. But that can be done at any time. It doesn't have to be done in the name of Christ. But the world takes it and makes it a religious holiday, and we get all emotional and all sentimental, and we give gifts one to the other. You see, that's what Adam and Eve did. They fed one another and they clothed one another, all in the name of religion. But in this particular case, these men gave Jesus Christ the gift. And unless that is the case in your heart, you're under the curse. No doubt in my mind. Unless you absolutely worship Christ and do things in his name correctly, the curse of Herod will come upon you. And we'll see what that is in a little bit. When they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. But one more thing here. Let's continue reading. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek to destroy him. Now, isn't that neat? One man says, I want to worship him. God gives the testimony of this man that he really wants to kill him. You see, Herod was the example of a man who was born with a beautiful sin nature. There perhaps was not a more giving man at first than Herod the Great. He was not always the monster that we see here in the Bible. He had a beautiful old sin nature, and he expressed it. One time his whole nation was starving. He went down to Egypt with 5 million of his own dollars, bought food, and went up and saved his nation. The reason was he simply actually had ulterior motives. He had to have some subjects to pronounce him king of the Jews. If they all starved to death, then he's out. But he did. He fed the nation at one time to retain this title, being king of the Jews. He rebuilt the temple that Jesus Christ went in and out of, that Jesus Christ used as an illustration several times. It was the same temple that Titus destroyed in 70 AD. It was Herod who rebuilt that. It was Herod who built the Tower of Antonia, where Jesus Christ was taken in before Pontius Pilate and there judged and so forth. It was Herod who built the palace of Herod, where Pilate sent Jesus over to the fox, Herod Antipas, the son of Herod, to be scourged and mocked and ridiculed, you see. This guy here did all of that. He built cities. The port city of Caesarea, they said that no seaport could ever be built in Caesarea. No seaport could ever be built, at least a good one for big grain ships and so forth, on the coast of Israel. And Herod, with his genius, came and said, I'm going to do it. And Caesarea, where Paul went to Tarsus, where Peter went and where Cornelius was saved, where Agrippa the First went for his great speech when he was eaten of worms, smitten of the angel, and so forth. It was Herod who built that city. Athens, where Paul preached on Mars Hill. Do you know who came in and renovated the whole city before Paul even got there? It was Herod. Herod was a fantastic man. The Olympic Games had died down because of lack of money. Herod comes in and gives about 3 to 5 million of his own dollars and starts the Olympic Games again. So historically, this man Herod is absolutely fantastic and important. Things that we have even today by way of the Olympic Games were salvaged by this man Herod. And originally, he was a fantastic genius. Now, he became a monster. You're to go down into Egypt with the young child, verse 14, until the death of Herod. Let's continue reading. That it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, out of Egypt have I called my son. Oh, let's stop right there and drill for just a smidgen of oil. Egypt in the Bible is a type of the world. When God spoke to Moses, and wanted Moses to be the leader of Israel, where did he bring Israel out of? Egypt. Why? Because they were idolaters, because they were Gentiles, because they were a type of the world. There was no wealthier nation or more powerful in the world when Moses brought Israel out of Egypt. But what did God do? Two things that we need to take note of here. One, he called Israel out of the world, and two, he destroyed the world. Now, what does that speak as far as we're concerned? Well, see, on that first Christmas, there is an antitype to this all. Jesus Christ went and was born. He was in the world, you see. He was made flesh, like you and like me. But whenever it came time for him to start his ministry, what did God do? Call him out of the world. He was in it. He was born in it. He was made part of it as far as the system, the legitimate system is concerned. But he did not stay with them. He was called out of Egypt. Out of the world have I called my son. Now, there's the story of Christmas for us. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. Yes, Christ came and was part of the world, was born in the world rather, and we acknowledge that. But we, like him, do not worship with the rest of the world. We're different. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked of the wise men, was exceeding angry, and sent forth and slew all the children in Bethlehem and the coast thereof, from 2 years old and under. Now let's go to the book of Luke. Again, chapter 2. It came to pass in those days, verse 1, that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus. Now, Herod was friend of Julius Caesar. He was assassinated. It's an interesting thing how he became the friend of Octavius, which is Caesar Augustus here. He had his buddy, Julius Caesar, to be assassinated. He was friends with Antony. Antony and Caesar Augustus had a falling out. He naturally had to side with Antony. But Caesar beat Antony in the Battle of Actium, and Antony took his own life. Cleopatra, Antony's cohort, escort, whatever you want to call her, tried to then seduce this fellow, and he said, I'm not going to have anything to do with you, and you know the story, how she allowed the asp to bite her, and she died too, committed suicide. But now here's Herod on the short end of the stick again. What is he going to do? Well, Caesar went to Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, and he was resting after the war. And Herod had made friends with the Rhodians, and so he came up there and said, would you please introduce me to this man again? So he came in, and Herod, you have to understand that Herod was one of the most beautiful, most handsome individuals in the what's known as the Augustinian age, the age of Roman glamour. Herod was the most beautiful person, as well as his second wife, Mariamne, we'll study in just a little bit, in all of the Roman world. Not only that, he was charming. He was intelligent. He was a good conversationalist. And so the Rhodians went to Caesar and said, may we introduce to you Herod the Great? And Herod said, I befriended Antony. I was on his side. He said, because Cleopatra wouldn't allow me on the boat with him, I would have been against you fighting. I would have been on the side of my friend Antony. Now, why wasn't he there? Because Cleopatra looked at this fella. She said, I have never seen anyone so beautiful and so handsome in all of my life. Would you please join me with about a week or two orgy? Herod the Great said, no, thank you. And it saved his life. It made her mad at him, and Antony was not allowed to take him on the boat heading toward Augustus Caesar in the Battle of Actium. So therefore, he was on land when they got beaten. He told Caesar, look here, I have to admit, I would have stayed true to Antony. But now he's dead, you know the story, and if you will simply befriend me, I will stay true to you and loyal to you. God said, bring out the ring, bring out the coat, put the crown on his head, you're king of the Jews, send him right back down there. That's exactly what happened. I mean, this guy was a genius. So, anyway, where am I now? Oh, we're Caesar Augustus. He's ruling the world. And this is how Herod now is down there as governor of Judea. He went to be taxed each in his own city. Joseph went up from Galilee to the city of Nazareth, or went out of the city of Nazareth, rather, to Bethlehem. So she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. Now here's where we want to pick up the story and show you how the wise men did not see Jesus Christ in the manger. Okay? Here we have the shepherds here, and they're out keeping watch over their flocks by night. The shepherds, verse 8, were in the same country, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. Now, what is that? There you go. The Shekinah. When's the first time that the star appeared? Well, the star was a symbol of a sign that God was coming among men. When God wanted to meet with Moses, he would have the Shekinah glory come down to the tabernacle, and he would go inside the tabernacle, and God and man would meet. It's a symbol that God and man are coming together. Jesus Christ is the occupant of the Shekinah glory. But in this case, the Shekinah glory is going to give forth the birth of its occupant in fleshly form. So, we have now the star appearing, and it's the Shekinah glory. So that happened, as we say, in April the 1st in 0 AD. But now, if you will look at your Bibles, in any case, they will say the 4 BC. We noted that there was about a 6-year discrepancy in what's known as the Gregorian calendar. We'll straighten that up later on, but that's not pertinent to our study now. So, when did this star appear? Lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them. The glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. I bring you good tidings of great joy. For unto you is born, when? This day. When did the star appear? This day, you see. So, the star appeared this day. Now, here were some magi over here, and they were looking through their ancient telescopes, and all of a sudden they noted this day that star was born. They looked in their records and so forth and said, yes, we remember a very wise man, a Jew by the name of Daniel, who talked about the star of the Jewish Messiah. And you see, Daniel was quite a Jewish evangelist for the Mosaic system and so forth, whenever he was called up to Babylon. And so, therefore, these people knew by Daniel of the coming of the Messiah and what would be the sign of his coming. When Jesus Christ comes back at the end of the tribulation, he says, look up to the heavens and ye shall see the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. What is that? The Shekinah glory. What is the sign of the coming of the Son of Man as a babe? The Shekinah glory star. And they saw it. Now, it would take them, by way of ordering and organizing their own house, forming a caravan for traveling hundreds of miles, because this is in Iran, by the way, and then by the time they had all of the papers and necessary paperwork and so forth, they came down to find him. Now, this was a sign to the shepherds. Ye shall find, verse 12, the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. But now, how do we know now that the wise men came approximately 2 years later? If you remember, on 2 or 3 different occasions in Matthew 2, Herod asked according to the time of the sighting of the star. And he calculated 2 years they killed the children and under. So by the time they saw that star, figured out what it was, made preparations to come, did the actual travel, and entered Jerusalem where Herod was, approximately 2 years had elapsed. Now, what did Mary and Joseph do during this time as the wise men were making preparation to come there? All right? Verse number 21. We're going to go fast here. And when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Jesus. Okay? You have 8 days that elapsed while they were in Jerusalem. Okay, hold your place here and look at verse number 22. And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem. Hold your place, turn to Leviticus chapter 12. Verse 2, if a woman has conceived seed and has borne a man-child, she shall be unclean 7 days according to the days of the separation of her infirmity. In the 8th day of the flesh of his foreskin shall he be circumcised. Okay, Jesus Christ according to Jewish, not tradition or custom necessarily. It was a law. The Abrahamic covenant incorporated the token of circumcision, or you could not be a Jew and you could not participate in Jewish worship. It was a law. It was incorporated into the Mosaic system as a law. But note, and she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days. And she shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come to the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. So you just add 33 more days. So they spent approximately 41 days in Bethlehem or in a house in Jerusalem. Now we know that they didn't come to Jerusalem and have the star hang over Jerusalem. They did not do that. Come back then to Luke chapter 2. We have 41 days that have elapsed between there and verse number 39. After verse number, yes, before verse 39. 41 days from April 1st in that first year of Jesus' birth. And when they had performed all things according to the law of the Lord, what was that? 8 days to the circumcising of Jesus, 33 more days to the purifying of Mary. They went up to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices. She was not allowed to go there to the temple until the days of her purifying were accomplished. She was unclean until that particular point. And so therefore, note what it says, they returned to Galilee to their own city, Nazareth, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit. Almost 2 years transpired. So here, they came down to Jerusalem. Here's Jerusalem here. They were headed toward Bethlehem because they saw the star here. But the star just simply headed due north to a town in Galilee by the name of Nazareth. They simply made a right degree turn and came up and saw Jesus Christ in his house, in his city, Nazareth. So that's an explanation of that. And as you can see, Christmas is not all that simple, is it? Just simply so-called reading of the Christmas story. There are a lot of things that are involved in understanding what was going on. Now, why was this true? Simply because they went from Bethlehem. About 41 days later, they went to Jerusalem. They went then from that point and lived approximately 2 years here until the wise men got here in Jerusalem. And then the wise men went back to Parthia, being warned of God, and Joseph went down to Egypt. Now, one of the best things, and I've got to close, one of the best things about this as far as the gift is concerned, one of the gifts was Parthian gold, the same gold that was poured down the gullet of Cassius. Parthian gold, enough to do what with Mary and Joseph? To keep them in Egypt without them having to work. They could stay at the side of the Christ child as his teachers and as his protectors until the time that they brought him back several years later to Nazareth.